It is 3/9 of 2015. We continue on to Volume 2 of Kojeve and his Phenomenology of Right. And Volume 1 was entirely about his theory, which was an excellent volume, but it was strictly in the realm of theory. Volume 2 is strictly in the realm of the sphere of right within externality. So we've been involved in elaborating this area of the sphere of right. We dealt with two primary concepts, and we dealt with structure. But he's getting further and further more into the concrete aspect of his theory. And so he runs into some difficulty because he's already told us years ago that he planned on making Hegel live according to what he proposed. And Hegel proposed a phenomenology, and Kojeve forced his philosophy to be a phenomenology. Well, that same critique has to be leveled against Kojeve. He can't slip into the concrete realm and then say that his philosophy is no longer about human self-consciousness. It is still about human self-consciousness. It is still phenomenology. And even though we're in Volume 2 of the concrete realm of the sphere of right, it's primarily about self-consciousness. It's primarily about phenomenology. And it demands a great deal of interpretive work by the reader. We're looking at 136 to 146. It's one of the most difficult abstract sections of logic that Kojeve has, and it's because he is more or less entrapped in having to write about the concrete aspects of the theory of the phenomenology of right, and that concrete area forces you to sometimes slip out of what you proposed as your interpretive critique, namely the master-slave parable of self-consciousness. So when I went through this material, I forced Kojeve to live according to the master-slave parable of self-consciousness. And that meant I had to take his abstract logic and not allow him to just delve off into French concrete government, which he did on quite a few of the pages. And I did not allow him to do that. I had him corralled back into the master-slave parable, and I'll be presenting his material here as that which it is intended to be when we reflect back to Volume 1. And that is a theory of a phenomenology of right. Even though we're dealing with a sphere of right, in actuality, we can't let it be 100% concrete. As a matter of fact, within the master-slave parable, the concrete equals notion, doesn't it? It equals notion, the internal externality. So it's a very, very strict rule to impose on Kojeve, but I'm going to impose it because he imposed it on Hegel. He forced Hegel to live according to his proposal, and I am forcing Kojeve to live according to his proposal. So we're going to look at this lesson on translation. I love this. It's really a beautiful way to work into the concrete side of the sphere of right, and that's with the concept of translation. And why does he use this concept? Because when we posit our notion of the right, we generally do it in a lot of different ways. Everybody uses a lot of different languages, many different modalities. Someone's positing in the field of ethics. Someone's positing in the field of economics. Someone's positing within the field of intersubjective relatedness. You have a lot of different things that could show up within a global society. And so Kojeve tells us in this lesson that one of the most fundamental aspects of the work that we do when we posit that character of universality is do the work of translation, and that is to take the proposed right, the right in question as being posited, and do a first work of translation, meaning translate it into sign language. translate it into sign language so we can start working with it within the field of the sphere of right, which is a field of right that deals with signs and sign models and intentionality, and we just can't take the raw possible right, or the right in question, and directly apply it without first translating it into the language of signs. So this is going to be very much a doctrine of translation, but it's going to be a very important one, because not only do we need to translate propositions and narratives into sign propositions and sign narratives, but we need to translate them through the parable of self-consciousness. There's a little bit of work that needs to be done. You can't just jump into saying, okay, we'll accept this into the universality model that we carry in society, or we will suppress it. No, you have to pass through translation first. So we're going to take a look at the first moment, which is the actual the right in question, the questioning. The posited individual notion of right must pass through 5 moments to become resolved and enacted in actuality. Number 1, there's a reference. The posited notion is reference to the currently held universal notion of justice that underlies the state and its directional sense. That doesn't mean concrete government, but it does mean notion, which notion is not 100% ideal, okay? It's a very strange concept, which we've already discussed, but it's an internal externality. It combines subjectivity and objectivity, so it is a concrete, but it's a concrete notion. So the right in question is referenced to the universal notion of justice that is currently held by the state as its directional sense. Second, the place of modality is determined as to where this posited individual right, this right in question, might fall. According to the structural model that's currently held as a universality of the state, where within that sign model is this going to fall? What modality that is enclosed under this generic concept of justice, which modality does it speak to? Third, we measure it. We measure the right in question as a positing against the universality held by the state. And then the first resolution that's performed is for structural resolution. We define the appropriate place of enacting. It's going to fit somewhere in the model, and it's going to be based, of course, upon which modality, out of which modality is this positing being made, and toward which modality does it speak? Is it economics? Is it ethics? Is it social? Is it global? We have to find its place within structure. And then we can reach content resolution, where after it's translated into sign, then we can start really dealing in a direct comparison of sign content with sign content, and we can determine, is it speaking to the territorial overall universality of the model, or is it speaking to the anthropogenic subjectivity of selfhood and speaking just directly toward psychology? Sometimes it's speaking to ontology, sometimes it's speaking to psychology. That has to be determined to determine the proper realm of content. Now, it's all about the second moment this time, just like it has been the last lessons, because in Volume 2, it's all about the sphere of right. So you'll notice that all of the writing and breakdown is in the second moment. It's the moment of translation of the right in question as sign. It will become sign in question. Now, number 1, most positings do not immediately appear as signs or sign models. They must be translated into signs or translated into sign models, and this will be an activity that is part of the process of the state sanctioning of a right. So 2, we'll look at translation. It finds its reference point in the universal notion of justice held by the state in its current existence. There will be in other words, the notion of justice is going to evolve within the state, but its currently held existence becomes the reference point. And that can be understood as an intersubjective communal moral citizenship. I mean, we have written concrete laws and civil rules, etc., etc., but also we have a general intersubjective moral understanding that it's not right to kill, it's not right to be abusive toward children, it's not. We have a whole series of unwritten, morally understood intersubjective norms and rights that we all hold as inalienable rights. We simply hold them as the understood based on a more fundamental enclosure of, say, the concept of humanity, the concept of being a human being. So we have this intersubjective universality of the communal moral citizenship that becomes a reference point. This underlying reality of personhood is the reference point for the work of translating out the sign-like anthropogenic efficacy of the right in question. So I love this that Kojeve points out here. If it's going to be a positing that we want to adopt, how does it help to give birth to true humanity? How does it become efficacious? How can it be a saving event? How does it contribute to the saving of event of creating life, creating meaningful life, creating humanity? This efficacious quality, which is anthropogenic. It deals with the being of being a human being. So it's anthropogenic efficacy is what we want to translate out of the positing. So the goal of the work of translation is to reach the moment of naming, where we actually take the right in question and name it as a sign in question. And that leads to 3, the important moment of offering up what we have extracted through translation. And that's the actual making the signification efficacious. And that's the work of enacting. So we go from translation to enacting. Enacting means reaching the mark of efficacy that a sign in question possesses. How does it propagate being? And metaphorically, Kojeve says you can understand this as an offering up. It's an offering up of the sign in question with its identified efficacious attributes. We've named it. We begin to extract and to itemize its attributes, all within this generic ideal of being efficacious, propagating selfhood, identity. So 4, this leads within the sphere of right to the moment of the efficacious place of enacting. After reference, the sign in question passes through the sphere of principle, which is the fundamental designated right realized at this moment in the global society's sphere of right. So we've moved on to principle, which is a structural whole that encloses all the modalities of right. Where does the sign in question fall? So we're dealing very specifically with what many thinkers call motivational base. And Kojeve says there is a generic interpretive principle that any global society that has a sustained existence over a period of time will develop a generic principle for its motivational base. He calls it kind of a juridical custom. And the sign in question passes through this critique, which addresses both reference and modality. So this translation work is, I think it's a very important concept for Kojeve to develop. I like the idea of using the term translation, but we have to take the right in question and really understand how does it point to something greater than itself. How does it point to the dignity of human being? How does it point? What are its efficacious attributes? How can it contribute to creating human life, true meaningful life? How can it contribute to the directional sense of our society? How can it contribute to the universal model that we hold as a communal moral citizenship? So I love this concept of translation. We just can't let it get hardened into something concrete here. We got to force Kojeve to stay in the realm of self-consciousness, to stay in the realm of phenomenology. You can't slip off into just talking about French government. You have to stick with your proposal in Volume 1 that we're dealing with phenomenology here. We're dealing with Hegel as a parable writer of master and slave. That takes us to the third moment, which is the actual resolution of the sign in question as efficacious, actually defining that efficacious moment by processing its anthropogenic efficacy. So the enacting process, after it passes through translation, after it reaches that moment of being translated from a rite in question to a sign in question, we can start understanding its efficacious attributes. Then we reach the moment of solidarity, and the sign in question is fitted into the governing juridical doctrine of signs. Because remember that we always begin with the juridical doctrine, then we move on to legal rules. The juridical doctrine encloses the singularity of legal rules. We had that the last lesson. But now we have to fit this sign in question. If we are going to enact it fully, then it needs to find its place in the sign model. And the sign model, when we're talking about justice, is not something like an ontological sign model of metaphysics. No, we're talking about justice. It becomes a governing juridical doctrine as a sign model, a governing juridical doctrine. So from here, it becomes actual as one of two ways. It can become part of the juridical doctrine as a dunamis notion. Remember that enclosed potentiality of power, dunamis notion. Or it can actually just move immediately on to written concrete government. It could do that. I mean, it is possible to move that quickly. But both areas will contribute to the government's work of creating state universality in the future. If it becomes a part of the juridical sign doctrine, then it will be an active member of this work of universality in the future. It becomes integrated, it becomes activated, it becomes enlivened, it picks up, remember last couple lessons ago, remember we talked about dunamis and energia. At this point it starts picking up energia, the ability to propagate human dignity, the ability to propagate human justice within the self-consciousness of others, within the aggregate of citizenship, to move from private rights to communal moral right, intersubjectivity, and universality. I like, this was a very, very difficult section, but I like the fact that Kojeve did introduce the term of translation. That'll wrap up 136 to 146.